Hello and welcome to Express Media's National Young Writers Month. I'm Josiah Lulham, an associate producer at Express Media, and with us today, you can see him behind me, is Benjamin Riley. Benjamin Riley is a Melbourne-based freelance journalist, editor and feature writer for national LGBTI newspaper Star Observer and a freelance politics and culture writer. Benjamin Riley runs The Underage, Express Media and The Age newspaper's journalism program for high school students. When we begin, you can join the conversation and ask questions by tweeting using the hashtag #NYWM15. And don't forget to check out the program online, get to a VoiceWorks 100 launch, and set yourself a goal for National Young Writers Month. Now, Ben, we're going to awkwardly switch over. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's very strange talking to mystery people on the internet. I've never done this before. So be gentle. So as Josiah said, I'm Benjamin Riley. I work for the Star Observer, national LGBTI newspaper. I'm a journalist there and the Victorian editor as well. So covering all sorts of stuff, mostly kind of politics and HIV and sexual health. So, I pitch there to my national editor on a daily basis, as well as taking pitches from writers. We get a lot of kind of unsolicited pitches for people wanting to get published with the Star Observer as well. Pitching is also a big part of The Underage, the program I run through Express Media with high school students. A lot of what we do in the meetings, which I run every fortnight with editors and journalists from The Age newspaper, is the kids will pitch to the group. It's a group of high school students. They'll pitch. We will talk through it as a group and kind of develop their ideas. And that process is a really valuable thing for not only kind of learning how to put a pitch together, but also just developing ideas generally and figuring out all the things that you need to know and have sorted to pull a pitch together and get a story together. I also do a bit of freelance writing on politics and culture, which is obviously pitching is a big part of that as well. In terms of what I wanted to talk about today, it's kind of hard to give really specific advice about how to write a good pitch, and there are a few different reasons for that. Partly it's because editors want really different things, and sometimes they want really specific things, and so it's kind of hard to generalize. The other thing is that most of what makes a particular pitch successful can have really nothing to do with how you've actually written it. Most of the work, I would argue, comes way before you're writing anything down at all. So we will be talking about, I guess, using pitches as a way to develop your ideas, as well as how you can then use that to approach editors and start making contact with publications. So I think if you're a young writer just starting out, it's best not to think of a pitching process as just, I have this really good idea, how can I get someone to say yes to publishing it? It can be this really valuable tool for refining your ideas. So yeah, as I said, it varies from editor to editor, so it's hard to give really specific advice. And I will talk a bit later about what I think does make a good pitch. But before I get to that, we'll talk a bit more generally. So I suppose I started thinking about this stuff really as a valuable way to be developing your writing ideas through my work at The Underage. So what we do there is we have a group of 12 high school students who come on board, attend fortnightly workshops at The Age with journalists and editors, and they pitch, we develop their ideas, they go away and write them, and eventually that's published on the Underage website, which is theunderage.com.au, I think, off the top of my head. And yeah, so the outcome is both, that they have this stuff published, but also that they're getting that exposure to people in the industry and how the industry works. And I think a little way into my time running that program, I realized that pitching sort of needed to be a really big focus of what we were doing. So obviously the kids were pitching stories already. That's a part of that process. But reading the stuff that they were submitting, it just became obvious that a lot of what people were writing there were just some really kind of basic questions about the kind of arguments and the ideas and the context for the story that hadn't been answered, and that really should be answered at the pitching stage or before the pitching stage. So what I ended up doing, and something that's become a big part of the program, is developing like a set structure for pitching. I get them to answer 5 different questions, which I'll talk about a bit later, that are really just about thinking through those ideas and making sure those ideas are really well developed. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you take that approach in terms of actually pitching to a publication, so when you actually send something in, but I think it is really useful as a tool. And it's the same at the Star Observer. The pitches that we get from new writers, particularly people who haven't been published before, the ones that we reject often have the same fatal flaw. It's that a writer really hasn't thought something through enough. It's not that they don't have the talent or the intelligence to write something good. It's just that they maybe haven't really developed their idea enough. So yeah, I mean, I think thinking more about your pitches is a good way, not to just kind of help you get published, but a good way to improve your writing generally. Before I get into talking through those questions I get the kids to ask at the underage, I think a really just general point to make about writing generally, but pitching in particular, is that it's really just super important to be reading a lot. It's kind of the best advice I think you can give a writer generally. Know what you're writing about and know what other people are writing on the same topics. So if somebody comes to me and says, I'm keen to kind of write about, I don't know, video games, say, and they say, where should I pitch an article about video games? I think the idea is more that you should be kind of looking about what you want to be reading about video games, go out and kind of read a bunch of different websites. You'll find stuff that you're interested in. You'll start to get a sense of what's being written and the kind of stuff that you like. And that will kind of lead you to where you might like to pitch to. So yeah, I mean, you can spend ages kind of working on a pitch and refining it and getting something just right. But if you send it into an editor and they say that a bunch of people have already written that same piece, it's just a rejection straight away. So you don't want to get knocked out at that first hurdle. Particularly when you're starting out, I think it's hard to do this, but it's also important to try to avoid the attitude that you should be pitching to wherever you think will publish you. I mean, that's, it's important to be realistic, but pitch to places that you like, pitch to places that have a style that you like, that write the kind of things that you like, because that will help, as I said, getting rejected on the basis that someone has written that kind of thing before. And when you do actually get to the point where you're putting together a pitch to send an editor, you'll have a good sense of the kinds of stories they like, the tone that they like, because you've been reading it. So to talk in more detail about what I do with the guys at the underage, we have a set of 5 questions. So as I said, I don't think it's a good idea to actually be pitching to publications in this structure, but they're definitely good questions to ask when you're putting a pitch together. And I think if you can't answer all of them to some degree of detail, you probably need to think about your pitch a bit more. So I'm going to put up a PowerPoint thing. Okay, I think that's worked. So, oops, that's not the right slide. There we go. So the first question is, what kind of piece are you writing? I mean, that's a pretty broad question, I guess, to get a sense of the sort of structure and tone that you're looking at. Is it a news feature? Is it an opinion piece? Is it a serious piece? Is it something quite light? This question will be dictated to a large degree by where you're pitching to, which again kind of points out how important it is to understand the publication that you're pitching to. And it's a really good way to just really start thinking about what you want to achieve by writing what you want to write. The second one is to have a go at just trying writing an opening line for your piece. It is an exercise. It's by no means going to be what you end up starting the piece with, but it's a good way to first of all get at what your piece is about, and what the tone is going to be, and what your kind of central idea is. You know, we talk about in journalism the lead, the opening line of a piece being often the hardest bit of the piece to write, but it's hard because it does really force you to think about what is the piece, like what are you trying to say. The third point is probably the most important one. Why does your piece need to exist? It's a bit dramatic, obviously, but it's a question I think a lot of people don't ask. And it's really just a way of saying, what sets your piece apart, what makes it different, and what makes it different to everything else that's been written on the subject. If it's a subject that no one else has written anything about, then that's awesome. Then you don't really need to worry about it too much. But I guess going back to my earlier point about the importance of reading a lot and reading a lot about the kind of things that you want to be writing, you might, you might be completely unaware that somebody else has written, say, like 5 reasons why Australian sporting culture has a problem with homophobia because you've never been on the internet, I guess. So figure out exactly what the point of your piece is and how it's different to what other people are doing. The fourth question, what are your sources? So when I do this with the kids at the underage, it's a little more specific. I ask them who 3 people are that they'll be talking to for the story that they're writing. But I think you can think about this a little more generally. Your sources can be people you want to interview for a story, and they usually are in journalistic writing. They could be books, films, documents, just something that you're getting information and background for your story. It's important, I think, for a couple of reasons. First of all, particularly with interviews, it gets you thinking about the practicalities of writing your piece. If you are pitching something that really requires having interviews with people that you have no idea how to get, obviously you're going to struggle to put it together. It also gets you to put your ideas into context a bit. If you're thinking about who knows more about this topic, what are they saying about it? And this is a really important point, I think, particularly in terms of opinion pieces. The best opinion pieces are well researched, and you can even interview people for them. I think if you can pull an opinion piece out of your ass without talking to anyone, without reading anything, you probably shouldn't be writing it, is a good rule of thumb. The last one is what are realistic deadlines and word limits. This is something you're usually talking about with your editor after you've pitched, but it's good to think about it before you start, particularly so you're not pitching something that you are not in a position to finish. Okay. So that was just a quick overview. Once you've thought about those things and answered those questions in terms of the idea that you're pulling together, there are practical things to consider before you move on to actually pitching it to someone. I wanted to talk a bit particularly about getting a portfolio together, because it's tough when you're first starting out, because unfortunately, more than anything else, the thing that will get you published is having been published before. And there are any number of reasons for that. Editors get a lot of pitches, and a name that they know, a name that they recognize is a safer bet for something that's going to come through and be good over someone they've never heard of. But it's also important to be able to show other writing that you've done so that they know that you can write. You can put together a really good pitch, but if you can't, structure a longer piece well, then you're going to kind of stress an editor out once that piece finally is submitted. Which, yeah, as I said, obviously sucks if you're trying to get published for the first time. So I think a way to think about that, once you've got a few things under your belt, it's easy because you can just send links to editors of similar things that you've written. But if you are trying to get published for the first time, I think it's okay to put together like a sample portfolio. So write a few kind of example pieces, and use those as kind of initial samples of your writing that you would send in with your piece. Or if you, say, wanted to start a blog and have those published there, you could then send an editor links to those pieces when you pitch as well. It's really just about having something to prove to an editor that you're not a terrible writer. The other thing that's tricky, obviously, when you're starting out, is that you're not going to have an editor who can go over those pieces and polish them up and get them kind of ready for to be the impressive pieces of writing that you want them to be. But even just having somebody you know read over them, have a look, it just is immensely, immensely helpful. Even just a friend or something like that, another person is going to be able to pick up little errors and things that don't make sense that you just can't see in your own writing. And it doesn't matter how experienced a writer you are, that's always going to be the case. So once you have once you've thought through those questions around your pitch, once you've got something to show, a portfolio to show that you kind of know basically what you're doing, and you've been reading around the subject that you're pitching about, and you have some ideas about where you want to pitch to, the next step is obviously to make contact with an editor. So, you picked a publication. The first thing is to try to find contact details. So usually they're going to be on the website or in the kind of first few pages of a publication. There might be a contributors section with an email address. If you can't find that information, it might be because the publication doesn't take pictures. That's often the case, although increasingly less so with online publications. I think if you're not sure, Twitter is almost always the way to go. It's such a useful tool for writers generally, but it also is just a way to get in touch with anyone really in the world who's on there, and pretty much every writer and editor is going to be on there. And it is, I think it's totally fine to just kind of tweet at somebody on there and ask them how you should be pitching and if you can be pitching. It's also a really good way to just introduce yourself at a basic level. I think anything you can do so that once you actually are sending your pitch to an editor, they already know your name and can recognize you, that is going to help you as well. So in terms of what to actually include in a pitch, it does really vary, and people are going to say different things and often kind of contradictory things. I think there are a few kind of basics that you can keep in mind. So I'm just going to put up a really basic list, but it's super important not to think of this as your pitch must have all of these things. It is going to vary. So bear with me a sec. Okay. So if a publication has pitch guidelines, and a lot of them do, they'll probably be listed in that same kind of contributors section. Then follow those and take those into account, and just kind of know the publication generally in terms of the sort of tone that they would like, which is going to be true for the pitch as well as the article itself. Don't pitch something that's kind of completely inappropriate in terms of subject matter or in terms of tone. Length also can be really variable depending on who you're pitching to. I think 100 to 200 words is a good length. Any longer than that, and people are just going to not be bothered reading the whole thing. But you also have quite a lot of information you want to communicate in a really short space of time. So you want to make sure you're getting all of it out there. Your key idea, obviously, it might be an interesting question. It might be a particular argument if you're writing an opinion piece. As I talked about before, what sets your idea apart, what makes it, why would an editor want to publish this? Hopefully because it's different to things that other people have written. If it's relevant, so particularly for a more journalistic piece, who will you be talking to, and how might that kind of make your piece more interesting and inform it? And also, why would readers of the specific publication that you're pitching to be interested in it? Have they run other pieces on kind of similar topics, maybe, that have been really popular and generated a lot of discussion? Okay, so that is, just a few kind of general points to keep in mind. In terms of where specifically to pitch, like I said, it's really going to vary depending on the kind of stuff that you want to be writing about. There is in the blog post that was kind of introducing this session, and I have the link. I'll just pop that up on the screen. So just in that second point there, I think I can highlight it. It's so fancy. So is a really good resource that's been put together just showing a bunch of different places to pitch to. It's like a collated list of pitching guidelines for various publications. So that's a good thing to have a look at, not only in terms of ideas for where to pitch, but also to get a sense of what pitching guidelines look like for different publications. And there are local and international publications on there. The second and really obvious one is VoiceWorks, Express Media's youth publication. It's for under 25s. They take submissions, and there are submission details on the website, which is listed there, voiceworksmag.com.au. In particular, I would really encourage young writers to be pitching to VoiceWorks. If they're writing nonfiction, VoiceWorks gets a lot of fiction submissions, which makes it much more competitive for a start. But I also know that they're very keen to be publishing more nonfiction stuff. The other really obvious one, if you're currently at university, regardless of what you're studying, if you want to be writing pitch to university publications, they're designed to be accessible. A lot of people got their start in university publications. It's where I first got started writing at Melbourne Uni's publication Farrago. So that's a really good way to get started as well. Okay, so I guess the only other thing I want to talk about is a few just miscellaneous pieces of practical advice. The session has mostly been about really using pitching as a way to develop your ideas and making sure that once you actually get to the point of pitching something to an editor, you know what you're talking about and your idea is solid. But there are a few other little things. Feel free to pitch multiple stories at once. It's totally fine, and editors often like that because it means that they can pick something. Feel free to follow up as well. I mean, you can be a pest, I guess, but it's a pretty high bar. I would say if you send a pitch and you haven't heard anything, say 2 or 3 days later, it's totally fun to follow up. Don't go nuts. Don't be sending like 3 emails a day. But editors, by and large, tend to be very busy people, and you may need to kind of shout to get their attention. A big one, don't be afraid of rejection. It's like, rejection sucks. It never feels great, but it does suck less the more that it happens, and it will happen. And I feel like it's kind of what do you call it when you just keep doing something and you get used to it, like immersion therapy or something.
Oh, yeah. Habituating as well.
Habituating, that sounds
right.
So it's going to happen. You got to get used to it. You might as well do it sooner rather than later. The other point I wanted to make is feel free to ask for feedback, both about your pitches and about your published work if you're accepted. In my experience, most editors are really, really happy to give it, and that's largely because hardly anyone asks for it. It can be tough because you might be feeling really crap after a pitch that you spent a lot of time on has just been rejected. But it is really worth kind of going to an editor and saying, could you give me some pointers on how I might have done this better? What wasn't appropriate about the pitch. So to do a quick recap. So yeah, the key points are, read a lot and read the kind of writing that you want to be writing. Know what other people are doing around the subjects. Think your pitches through. So, really kind of get your ideas clear and together so that you know what you want to write and you've got your ideas set in your head. Get a portfolio together. And that, as I said, can be just you writing kind of sample pieces that aren't kind of intended for publication, but are just to show that you can write. Know the publications you're pitching to, do your research, find out what they like and the kind of stuff that they publish and their tone. And as I just said, follow up and ask for feedback. If you haven't heard anything back, it might just be because the editor got like 1 million emails that day and yours got lost. So that's about all I wanted to talk about. Just if we've got questions, we can do that now. So I think just invite people
to hashtag NYWN15.
So yeah, if you tweet with the hashtag NYWM15, we can have some questions.
We'll be here for another 2 minutes.
I'm just going to. We'll be here. I don't know if people can hear you. We'll be here for another 2 minutes. So if you send something through, we'll be able to answer questions.
Where did you first get published? So people can hear.
Where did I first get published? It was at the Melbourne Uni student publication, Farrago. So yeah, like I said, they're a really good place to get started, and a lot of people do. I think the reason they're so good is because they're not, often the process of talking to an editor can be very removed. You're probably not even meeting them. University publications are really about kind of building up a community around them. So I think that's a good place to get started.
And where did you find there's another question up there for you now.
Cool. Questions come through. Where did you find the courage to move from uni publications to publications beyond uni? Uni publications tend to have a lot of connections to the broader writing community and the kind of journalism community as well. So if you get involved in those connections kind of tend to happen quite naturally. I met a lot of people through that, but in terms of what did I do? When I finished my degree and after I stopped writing for Farrago, I think I just cold called a bunch of places and told people I was interested in writing for them. I suppose because I was interested more in doing journalism rather than feature writing. So I was keen to kind of come on board somewhere and do some staff writing as opposed to pitching specific features. And was lucky enough that someone said yes, they were keen for me to come on and do some work for them. So I mean that's a good point, I guess, that the process of pitching for feature writing for magazines and that kind of thing is very different to pitching if you are a journalist, and often that process happens within the context of a newsroom. So I suppose in that sense I was kind of like pitching myself and just calling newspapers and doing that. And it is like a really kind of nerve-wracking process, always just calling people and asking them if you can work for them. But yeah, I don't know. As I said, you have to get used to rejection and building up that the courage to do those things as soon as possible, I think is good.
Cool.
Cool. Okay, well, we might finish up. Thank you very much, everyone, for sending questions in and listening. And yeah,
I'll jump back on.
That's
real
it.
Quick.
We're swapping over.
Bidding adieu. Thank you very much for that, Ben. And I hope, ladies and gentlemen, you enjoyed seeing me typing things in the background there. Thank you all, everyone, for tuning in for this National Young Writers Month online event. A big thank you to Ben Riley for giving up some of his time. And if you want to find out more about Benjamin Riley, you can follow him on Twitter at Ben C. Riley. That's BENCRILEY. And Ben, do you have a personal website as well?
I do not, no.
Unfortunately, he does not have a personal website, but one day he will. And when he does, you can find him there. If you missed the beginning of our broadcast, the whole conversation will shortly be on YouTube, so jump online and catch up. Express Media's National Young Writers Month is occurring throughout the month of June, both physically and virtually. Tune in tomorrow for our next event at 6 p.m. Across State Lines, a conversation about writing opportunities and experiences for young people across Australia, presented by Caitlin Pliley, featuring Alex Griffin from Western Australia, Sophie Overett from Queensland, Emily Meller from New South Wales, Lucy Nelson from the ACT, Katarina Bryant from South Australia, and Caitlin Richardson from Tasmania. In the meantime, keep up to date with the National Young Writers Month blog on the Express Media website, www.expressmedia.org.au. Check out the Twitter hashtag, #NYWM15, and get yourselves along to a VoiceWorks 100 launch, and importantly, set yourselves a goal for the National Young Writers Month. Thanks again for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you all again. Ben, let's give everyone a little wave.